name is Daria. Let's look at how healthcare practices and clinical operations handle inbound call volume, what actually works, what doesn't, and why certain problems keep coming back regardless of what gets done. What I'm going to talk about in this video is a pattern I see constantly in healthcare operations. It's not a staffing problem, it's a structural one. And understanding the difference is the reason some practices finally get out of the cycle and others stays in forever. Here's a statement from someone who spent 21 years working in a medical call center. 21 years in a medical center, every clinic adds headcount. The queue never empties and the problem never goes away. More staff treat the symptom. 21 years. That's not an outline experience, that's a pattern. And it shows up in every recognizable sequence. The call queues get too long, patient complain, leadership agrees something needs to change, and a new hire is approved. The queue shortens slightly for a little bit for about 4-6 weeks. Then it fills back up again and the conversation starts all over again. If that sounds familiar to you, it's because it is familiar to almost every practice manager who has been in this role for more than 2 years. The question worth asking is why? Why does adding resources to a capacity problem not fixing the capacity problem? The answer is that the call volume in a healthcare setting is not a fixed number waiting to be served. It's a number that responds to the system around it. And if the said system is generating calls unnecessary, which is in most practices is the case, then adding more people to answer those calls is not a solution. It is a more expensive version to the same problem. Let's be specific about what this means. When the patient can't get through to your practice, they call back. If they can't get an appointment, they call and chase it again. If the prescription requirement wasn't confirmed, they call back again. If they left a message and nobody called back, they again call again. Every one of those calls is a real call. It takes a real time to handle. It sits in the queue alongside every other call, and it feels from inside the practice like normal call volume. But a meaningful portion of those calls exist because of the gaps or failures earlier in the process. A confirmation that didn't go out, a callback that was promised but didn't happen, a result that was available but never communicated, a system that patient has learned to trust so they can verify everything manually. These are not calls from the patient who need clinical help. These are calls from patients who are trying to compensate for a system that isn't working properly, reliably enough for them to trust it. And when you hire a new receptionist to handle these calls, here's what happens. Those calls get answered faster usually. The queue shortens, the practice feels better, but the upstream failures that generate those calls is still there, still generates the same volume. The new hire is now absorbing the consequences of a system problem that nobody has touched. A few weeks later, the queue is back. There is research on this that healthcare operation leaders find generally surprising when they first see it. In high call volume healthcare environments, somewhere between 40 and 43% of inbound call volume is what gets called avoidable contact. These are calls that exist not because patient has a new clinical need, but because the system failed to handle something earlier, completely or reliably. 40%, just think about it. That is close to half of the volume of your call. If your practice receives 200 calls a day, roughly 80 of those calls are happening because something upstream didn't work. A message that wasn't sent, a process that required a phone call to complete when it could have been handled another way. A confirmation that patient had learned will only arrive if they chase it. Those 80 calls are being answered by your receptionist, including the ones you just hired. And here is why is it important. When you hire to solve a call volume problem, you're finding the symptoms of a broken system. You're paying people to handle calls that the system itself is generating. The headcount makes the consequences more manageable, but it doesn't reduce the consequences. It doesn't touch the system that produces them. This is why the queue fills back up. Not because your team is not working hard enough, not because you didn't hire enough people or right people, but because the thing creating the volume hasn't been changed. The reason the cycle is so hard to break is that hiring does work partially, and partial results are very convincing. When a new receptionist starts, the queue shortens. Patient satisfaction scores goes up, the complaints slow down, the practice manager can breathe for a few weeks, and that is real, and it makes it very easy to believe that the strategy was correct and just need more of itself. The problem is what happened next. Turnover in healthcare admin is high. In some settings, every 3 to 4 months. Each time someone leaves, the knowledge they built walks out with them. Training and replacement takes 4 to 6 weeks. During that window, you're back to the queue problem, and the cycle begins again. another complaint period, another approval for a hire, another few weeks of breathing room. And in the background, the structural causes of call volume are untouched. The avoidable contact is still happening, the upstream gaps are still there, the practice is just circling through staff, paying training course repeatedly, and never quite getting ahead of the queue. More staff treat the symptoms. That was the observation after 21 years. It doesn't get less true within the 22nd year. Fixing this at the structural level starts with a question most practices haven't formally answered. What percentage of your call volume is avoidable? Not an estimate, an actual breakdown. By call reason, by time of the day, by whether each category of call could have been prevented by a process change upstream. Once you have that breakdown, the picture changes completely. Because some of these call categories can be reduced, not eliminated, by reduce by closing the upstream gap that are generating them. The calls that remain after that analysis are your true inbound demand. Patients with general clinical need, appointment requests that require human judgment, complex situations that can't be handled any other way. That is the call volume your staffing model should be building around, not the inflated number that includes everything the system is generating unnecessary. I'm going to make a video that goes deeper on the diagnostic side of the thing. 5 things to check in your current call setup that tell you whether you have a structural problem. I'll link it here when it's up. Here's what I want you to take from this video. First, call volume in healthcare practice is not a fixed number. It's partially a measure of how well your system is working. A system with gaps generates extra calls. Those calls look identical to clinical demand, but they are not. Second, hiring to solve the call volume problem treats the symptoms. It makes the consequences more manageable. It does not reduce the volume. It does not touch the system producing it. That's why the queue backs up. Third, somewhere between 40 and 43% of inbound healthcare call volume is avoidable contact. The number is your starting point for structural conversations, not another headcount approval. One question before you go. When you look at your busiest call period, what is the most common reason the patient are actually calling? Is it a clinical need, or is it chasing something the practice should have already done and communicated? Drop it in the comment. I read everything, and it genuinely helps me understand what is happening across different practices type. If this video was useful, subscribe to my channel. I make videos like that every week on call operations, on patient access in healthcare and hospitality. Thank you so much and have a great day.